Welcome to RWM Blue Arm Ministry. I'm your host, Bob Manook. If you enjoyed this message, hit the like button. If you want to see more, subscribe. We're continuing our series today of Church of State, and today's episode is 4.2a, Masks and Vaccines, Part 1. Today we are revisiting Allie Beth Stuckey and her Relatable Podcast. Her guest is Jennifer Seys, a former executive with the Levi Strauss Company. This is a thoughtful and sensitive conversation, enlightening. So we're going to pick up part 1 now, and in the next episode we'll cover part 2. Let's watch the video.
A new meta-analysis of studies looking at the efficacy of masks found that community mask wearing made little to no difference in mitigating COVID. And a new study in The Lancet shows that natural COVID immunity is at least as effective as vaccine immunity. This in addition to a national report card published last fall by the National Assessment of Educational Progress that shows a precipitous decline in student performance since 2019. Interesting. These are things you and I and millions of other Americans have known since 2020. And yet millions of Americans lost their jobs for questioning the official quote-unquote COVID science on masks, vaccines, and school closures, including our guest today, Jennifer Seys. She was an executive at Levi's, a self-identified leftist who took issue with the COVID mandates and how they were affecting children. And she was pushed out of her company for her outspokenness. So today she's going to tell us her story and just the emotional response that she had to feeling betrayed by the company and her coworkers that she had known for over 20 years, and how difficult it has been to be pushing back against Democrat Party orthodoxy. She's also going to tell us her reaction to these recent studies today. This is an amazing conversation. You're going to be encouraged by her bravery and maybe a little bit peeved that finally the scientific community is catching up to our common sense. This episode is brought to you by our friends at Good Ranchers. Go to goodranchers.com. Use promo code Allie at checkout. That's goodranchers.com, code Allie. Jennifer, thanks so much for joining us. For those who might not know, maybe they haven't heard your story yet, tell us who you are and what you do.
Yeah, absolutely. My name is Jennifer Seys, and I worked at Levi's for close to 23 years, which is a really long time in the world today. No one does that anymore, stays in a company for that long. I started as an entry-level marketing assistant in 1999 and worked my way all the way up to brand president in 2020 and was next in line to become the CEO. I would have been the first female CEO of the company.
Wow.
But in March of 2020, I was outspoken about restrictions placed on kids in particular, public school closures, the masking of very young children, closed playgrounds. In my former city, San Francisco, playgrounds were closed for close to 10 months. Basketball hoops were taken down at playgrounds. Beaches were closed. So I was very outspoken about these things. And after a 2-year conflict at the company with my colleagues telling me I needed to stop, all while their own children were at in-person private school, I was eventually told in January 22 that there was no longer a place for me in the company. And I was offered severance to stay quiet about, why I was leaving,
right,
which is that I was shoved out the door. And I decided not to take that $1 million in severance so that I could talk about the censorship inside corporate America.
And previously, before you started talking about these COVID restrictions and the repercussions of them, did you find yourself pretty politically and ideologically aligned with a lot of these coworkers that were now pushing back against you in regard to COVID?
I definitely did. I mean, I'd been a lefty my whole life. I was politically aligned with the citizenry of San Francisco and had never, faced any conflict. And I had been outspoken about my politics in the past and no one had any issue. But for whatever reason, COVID lockdowns and, no one gets to do anything until there's zero COVID became the policy, the official policy and orthodoxy of the left. And I viewed it as a trespass of their stated values and came to believe that their stated values were false and, completely hollow. It was everything was so harmful to children, to lower income folks, to working class folks. We've seen the largest upward transfer of wealth in history due to the restrictions and the lockdowns. And, in a sense, I feel I stayed true to my values.
Right.
I've always, I've been an advocate for children for a very long time. I was an elite gymnast as a child and wrote a book in 2008 about the abuse in that sport, the emotional, physical, and sexual abuse in the sport of gymnastics. And so I'd been involved in children's advocacy for, close to 15 years at this point. And I saw this advocacy as an extension of that because it was so obvious to anyone with eyes that children would be harmed. And yet we were told we needed to further an obvious lie, which is that kids weren't resilient enough to withstand this. They were not.
Right. And what you said about you feel that you actually stayed true to what have been considered kind of left wing and liberal ideas. Obviously, I don't consider myself a liberal or on the left, and I never have, but I can understand how from a left-wing perspective, someone would articulate that their ideals are equality, income equality, racial equality, rights for the most vulnerable, fighting for the powerless. Those are kind of the ideas and ideals that people on the left have said that they have championed for a while. And while I disagree with a lot of the means implemented to do that, I do understand and can sympathize with some of those stated goals. And so when you decided to push back against this, when you looked at what was going on and you saw, for example, that there was an upward transfer of wealth, that your rich white friends were able to put their kids in pods or homeschool them or keep them in private schools, but that wasn't accessible for people who didn't have the same resources, you kind of said, okay, I'm going to just keep championing the values that I always have. I'm going to keep on talking about the things that I've always talked about. So my question for you is, why do you think that all of these people that you considered yourself to be ideologically aligned with for so long, what was the difference? You went one way, they went the other way. Did you have an experience? Did you see something? Or what do you think it was that made the difference for you versus them?
You know what, Allie Beth, I think I will be trying to figure this out for the rest of my life. Honestly, it's really confounding. All I can say is that I've always been about principle more than party. So it was never about an allegiance to a particular orthodoxy or a particular party. It was about equality of opportunity. It was about children. I sent my own children to public school, though I couldn't, though I could have afforded private because I want them to be part of the community that they live in. And I believe in that. And so, it's hard for me still to wrap my head around the trespass of their own stated values. I can only say that they never really embraced them and they never really believed it. And it was always about orthodoxy and allegiance to party rather than principle. And needless to say, that's pretty disorienting and upsetting, but it doesn't change my view. And I think that that situation has intensified over the last few years, and the tribalism has intensified. It used to be you could be a part of a party and not hold every single, view of that platform, right? You could be. That is not possible anymore.
Yeah.
You cannot. And so if you question one pillar of the platform, you are then assumed to be evil.
Yeah.
And, I was called the worst unemployable names because I questioned school closures, which obviously were going to hurt children. I was called a racist. I was called a fat phobian. I was called a eugenicist and all these things. And the arc of your life doesn't matter. What you've done in your life doesn't matter. They will vilify you to keep others silent, because it became very clear at a certain point that I was not going to be silent. But you know what? It certainly kept others silent because nobody wanted to put themselves through what I went through. So it's just this sort of complete allegiance to the party without, even thinking through if what they're saying is true or makes sense. And I refuse to do that. I refuse to further a lie. I'm loyal to the truth and I will advocate for children. And that's it.
Yeah. And I'm curious if you agree with this. I do see tribalism certainly on both the left and the right. But to me, from my perspective as a conservative, it seems to be a lot stronger on the left, because when I look at even my fellow hosts at Blaze TV, which is definitely a right-wing conservative network, we disagree on some really big things. We might disagree on the whole we might disagree on several things. I'll just say that there are plenty of culture war and political things that we disagree with. But at the end of the day, hey, if you're going to fight against these mask mandates with me, I'm willing to link arms with you, even if we really disagree with abortion or this thing over here. I see a lot of that. Not that I don't see a lot of infighting on the right, because I certainly do. But there seems to be a lot more acceptance of heterodox views on the right than the left. And I think even you kind of being on a lot of conservative shows and being elevated by a lot of people on the right is kind of evidence of that it seems like the tribalism on the left and the purity tests on the left, to me, they seem a lot stronger than what we have on the right. Now that you've kind of seen both sides and been in both camps, do you agree with that?
Yeah, I mean, I have to say my experience in the last 3 years would reflect exactly what you're saying. I am hesitant to join any party at this point, and I'm a registered independent right now. And you can understand why I might be a little gun shy, because I don't want to be forced to sign in blood that I will uphold every principle that the party puts forth. But to your point, I have spent the last year being invited to talk to folks like you, and I'm sure that you and I have plenty that we disagree on, and I'm sure there's plenty that we agree on, but you're willing to sit here with me and talk about this and link arms with me on the things that we do agree on, and not consider me a wholly evil person just because we disagree on some other issues. And that's the change, I think. It's like you used to be able to disagree with your friends, disagree with your party members, disagree with members of the community on certain things and not be viewed as evil. And that just doesn't seem to be the case on the left anymore. And they will go after you with such vile, aggression to just rid you from the party and their community. You're viewed as sort of a heretic if you disagree on anything. And it doesn't matter if you make sense. I cited data. Here's the thing. Everything I said has borne itself out. It was true. And yet there's still no redemption.
Yeah, that's the thing. And that's something that I've seen a lot on the left. And again, not saying that it never happens on the right, but that there's almost no chance of redemption unless you go through some kind of Maoist style struggle session where you've been sufficiently shamed and therefore sanctified into recanting your position and just repeating the party lines over and over again until the people in power deem your groveling sufficient. Is that even really democracy, which is a value that a lot of people on the left say that they uphold? It's not. It's a form of totalitarianism, even if it's not the president of the United States coming down and saying you have to say this. It's a kind of like, I know this is going to sound weird, but democratized totalitarianism where the people are the ones that are actually inflicting the tyranny rather than like the power at the top. That just doesn't seem sustainable to me.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more, actually. And in fact, I was forced to participate in one of these struggle sessions that you mentioned. In June of 2021, I was told I needed to do an apology tour internally at the company. Why? One, because of the stances I had taken very publicly. And at this point, schools have been closed for over a year in San Francisco. That's 50,000 students kept out of school for over a year. And still no sign of them opening, and no sign of them opening in the fall. And so I was asked, and the other thing that prompted it was I was invited to go on Fox News. So I appeared on the Laura Ingraham show in March of 2020, and that was such an egregious violation in their minds that I was made to do this apology tour. Now, you'll like this. Before the apology tour, a colleague sent me a list of questions I should be prepared to answer. This is straight out of a CCP struggle session. Are you with us or against us? Are you one of them or are you one of us? Let's see. Are you a wolf in sheep's clothing? That's what we think. Are you a racist? Are you aware that advocating for open schools is racist? Are you a conspiracy theorist? As if anyone answers yes to that question. Now, I agreed to do the apology tour because I was not going to apologize. I was going to explain myself, which is exactly what I did. And I felt, I could build a bridge if I'm always very diplomatic and I cited data.
That's part of what made you successful, I'm sure, and allowed you to work yourself up in the company because, you don't get to where you were without being able to deal diplomatically with all different kinds of people. But now you find yourself in a position where that strength isn't working.
Well, there was no convincing anyone. I mean, it was just, it's hard to explain. I'm not sure where you live, but it's hard to explain what it was like in San
I can
Francisco, in a
imagine.
very left-leaning city during COVID. I mean, I was literally, my husband and I were alone. We were the only ones, and we were standing there going, it's so obvious. How do you not see this? How do you not see that locking a child in their room for over a year is going to be, how do you not see that that's harmful? It's so patently obvious. And it was so patently obvious that we were using children as human shields. You know, we're not supposed to sacrifice children for the well-being of adults. And
Right.
that's what we were told we had to do. And yet, you know, there was no veering from this. And anyone who did, and, you know, veering could be just asking a question, you know, just literally saying, are we sure this is the right thing? Is this really helping? Or is this doing more harm than good? Just for saying that, you were deemed as an evil apostate. And there, you know, I mean, I remember walking around San Francisco and a woman came up to me and my daughter, who was 4 at the time, and she screamed in our faces. My daughter and I were at the beach without a
Oh my
mask.
goodness.
And she screamed in my daughter's face, I will not feel sorry for your mother when you die.
Oh my goodness. Imagine saying that and thinking that you are actually on the compassionate and good side.
That's my point. It's like it justified such cruelty, this certainty that they were the morally virtuous as a member of this COVID tribe that was willing to do anything, to sacrifice any freedom, any liberty, any child. That made you good and virtuous. And this is the purview of totalitarian regimes, right? They offer you safety in exchange for your freedom. That is always the deal.
Yeah.
There is no difference. So I could not agree with you more. This was pure tyranny, and businesses upheld it.
Yeah.
Even if they weren't asked, it was this sort of total collaboration or partnership between big business. We've seen it now with big tech, and the government and big pharma, and they carried water for the government's policies, you know, for the left-wing narrative, which ultimately became the government in November of
Yeah.
2021. And so, but it justified all manner of cruelty. I mean, it's grotesque. And the harder I was pushed, the more I stood my ground, because it didn't make sense to me. At one point I was told by our head of HR, because do you know, I got a call every 2 weeks telling me I had to stop. That when I spoke on behalf of the company, and I said I did not. I was just a mom. Yes, I hold a senior position, but I'm a mom for public school children. I don't give up my rights as a citizen just because I have a job. Right. And, you know, at one point, maybe a year into this, our head of HR said, Jen, I agree with you, but you just can't say these things. And I reject that outright. Yeah. Why? Why can't I say these things? Because it violated the Democratic Party narrative. That is why. I was also told I couldn't criticize Governor Gavin Newsom.
Wow. So you check your First Amendment rights at the door just because you have a job. That seems to be what a lot of people on the left unfortunately think about a whole host of people. Obviously you are... Oh,
yeah,
go ahead.
Oh, I was going to say, you know, there's some people that say, well, it's because you have a senior job, you know, you're public facing, right? In many ways, I was the face of the Levi's brand. I was the chief marketing officer and then the brand president. It's important to note, whenever I spoke about these matters, I never used my title. I was on the local news. I was on the national news. I always said, identify me as a mom of 4. I took any connection down on my social media to Levi. So I made it clear I was speaking for myself. But, you know, some folks would say, well, as that sort of executive and leader position in the company, you had a different obligation. Well, I had no contract that stated such. So that's the first point. I don't believe that just because I have a job, I give up my rights as a citizen. And beyond that, if I, an influential senior executive, well-liked, beloved in the company, can't speak out about things that impact my family, my children, and the children of the community, what chance does a, you know, workaday employee have being able to do so? So I actually would argue that the point is the opposite. You know, I have to be able to do it so that others can.
Exactly. And obviously you're a very strong and confident person. You wouldn't have kept going if you weren't. You wouldn't have gotten to where you were and are if you hadn't been. But you're also a human being. So I imagine that there were at times that you got your feelings hurt. I mean, this company had been a part of your life for 20 years. I'm sure a lot of these coworkers felt like family. Levi's in general probably felt like family, and a lot of your future maybe had even been kind of mapped out with Levi's central to that plan with you becoming the CEO. So tell me about the feelings that I'm sure you felt of personal just betrayal. Were there moments that you just kind of like broke down to your husband and you were like, I can't believe this is happening to me?
Absolutely. I mean, I still have them, if I'm really honest. It's only been a year.
Yeah.
I'm still sorting it. These were my friends, hundreds, if not thousands of people. I managed a team of over 1,000 people. There were people that had worked for me at Levi's for over 20 years. I helped them build careers. I went to baby showers and weddings. I even attended funerals of family members. I had 4 children there. I built a life there. It's the better part of my adult life that I spent there. And these were my friends, and I talk to no one anymore. It's incredibly difficult.
Yeah.
And, my husband's a little more strident than I am. And I actually, interestingly, got in trouble for things he would say on social media as well, which is a whole other can of worms, which we don't need to talk about. But he, I would get really upset and I would cry sometimes. And he would say, who cares what they think? They're wrong. Why do you care if they like you? They're wrong. They're being cruel and evil and they're harming children and they're wrong. And he, gave me the sort of energy and confidence to keep going. He just has a different outlook than I do. I don't like to be hated. I hate it, but I care about the truth and I care about children more. And so I am willing to withstand the slings and arrows and cancellation and joblessness if I have to.
Gosh, it makes such a big difference to have a husband, to have a spouse in your corner that is strong, even though you see things a little bit differently when it comes to kind of like personal relationships and people liking you. I feel like that's really a normal kind of dynamic in marriages, but it helps a lot if you have someone who reminds you that the truth is worth it. Sometimes, the truth is even worth losing those relationships over if the other person is being cruel. And I can just imagine, you said like the arc of your life and your career didn't matter. All these people who knew for a fact that you were not a racist called you a racist. All of these people who knew for a fact that you were not a bigot who hated people and didn't care about grandma were calling you someone who was advocating for genocide. And that really hurts. Like, I know when I've gotten accusations from people who know me because I'm a conservative or whatever, that I'm like, that's not my character though. You know me. You know that that's not true about me. Like, that cuts a lot more than the random troll on the internet who, calls me a name or something like that. So I just imagine that this has been a really emotional time.
It has been really difficult. It's nice that you recognize and acknowledge that. And I like I said, I haven't fully kind of sorted it yet. I mean, I have, there's a member of my family, a close member that I haven't spoken to in close to 3 years because he considers my views evil and wrong. I mean, imagine that. A family member, talk about knowing the arc of your life. I have 4 children. My 2 oldest children are mixed race. Their father is Black. To be called a racist is just ridiculous. And yet, if I were to say that, which I'm saying to you, I'm said to be sort of shielding my racism with my own children. So, I mean, the whole thing, it's absurd. And at first it was really hurtful, but honestly, I got to the point where I could sort of laugh at it because it was so nonsensical. It didn't make any sense. And really, those sorts of vicious ad hominem attacks are only meant to silence. They are the purview of those with no argument. Why not engage me on the merits of my argument?
Yeah.
Why just resort to name calling? Because you don't have an argument. So I did get to the point where I could blow those things off. But the hard thing was about halfway through, because I spent 2 years in conflict at the company, about halfway through, I started to realize that I very well could lose my job. And I'm the breadwinner in the family. My husband doesn't work. He stays home with our children. I have 2 kids in college. It's a risky, scary thing. And apparently, even as an executive, I didn't negotiate all that well for myself. And so it's not like I'm in a position where I don't need to work. I absolutely need to work. And yet I'm still considered pretty toxic in the corporate world. Not because I was wrong at this point, but because I didn't toe the party line. I get a lot of, well, why did you have to say it? Why didn't you just wait? Well, if I just waited, who was going to say
Mm-hmm.
it? Somebody has to go
Right.
first.
And looking back at your time at Levi's, I'm sure you saw corporate America change and kind of lean more into liberal political activism. And you said before this, you had kind of been outspoken about your politics. But now looking back, do you kind of see maybe some red flags that you didn't notice in the moment when you saw, we're a lot more politically overt than we were before? Kind of seems like we're pushing values down people's throat as a denim company that we weren't doing previously. Do you look back and see that? Do you feel like you were kind of a part of this shift leftward of corporate America?
I do, to some extent, although there's a bit of a line for me that I don't really think I necessarily crossed. Levi's had always been they would have said a progressive company that valued profits through principles. So, making money and driving a successful business in a principled way. And that really had always been turned inwards in terms of how they treated employees. So, for instance, they integrated factories in the South before the law required it. That was something I was proud of. I think that was courageous. And there were employees who rejected it. People were angry. They didn't like it. But Levi's, stood their ground. In the 1980s, the company did not enter China when it opened up because of the working conditions for Chinese people. I think that was an ethical stance. And so, I always felt proud to work there because of those things. But sometime in the mid 2010s, we did start to, and I was there and I was part of it. We did start to sort of reflect and amplify those things outwards as a way to appeal to younger generations. But I think in some ways, again, some aspects of it were acceptable. So, featuring a more diverse and inclusive cast in our commercials, not just women who are 6 feet tall and 102 pounds, I think is more welcoming to more women. So, that is at the beginnings of the body positivity movement, which I think now has turned a bit toxic and dangerous, possibly. But, again, it's all in execution.
Right.
But then sometime, like I think it's great to see a woman who is 5'4" and 135 pounds in an ad.
Yeah, I would
that's
agree.
someone I can look at and go, that looks like me. I know kind of what I might look like in those jeans. But then somewhere in the late 2010s, it did start to go woke. And I think this is an attempt by, for whatever reason, corporate America seems to be now populated, at least on the coast, which is where a lot of major companies are, by people who at least pretend to be very left wing. I'm not even going to say whether they are. And I think it's an attempt to profit off of millennial and Gen Z activism. That's a cynical view, but it's truthful. I've been in the boardroom. I think it's a shield from scrutiny. It's like the press loves it. They love these left-wing stances and they champion and celebrate these leaders because of it. And they don't interrogate the business. I think Sam Bankman-Fried is a great example of that from FTX. And Elizabeth Holmes featured on every magazine cover pretending to be saving the world, and nobody investigated the fact that their businesses were shams. And so, I think it sounds like a cynical view, but I think it's correct. What I would like to see is the other thing I will say is these leaders, there is a part of them, they love to be celebrated. It's not cool to be rich anymore. You're supposed to denounce your privilege. So this is their way of doing it, right? They pretend they're saving the world and that they never meant to get really rich, which is false. You don't make $40 million without meaning to, And in fact, at Levi's in 2020, we laid off 15% of the workforce, and the CEO simultaneously cashed out $43 million in stock. And he said that the layoffs were done with empathy and that we were worker focused. So again, it's always really about enriching themselves, but shielding themselves from scrutiny. And that's where, for me, the hypocrisy just gets too great to stand by and not say anything. And then it all intensified in the summer of 2020. So that's when every company on the planet started to disavow their racism and their white privilege and pledge to make a difference by posting black squares on Instagram, but not really doing anything else.
And to your point about, doing things to save face or just having a facade of empathy and activism while different things are going on behind the scenes that the press doesn't really care about. Like Levi's, you said at first, they decided not to manufacture out of China, but they do now, right? Like, I think I've noticed that plenty of Levi's things are made in China, right? Even while talking about social justice and equality here.
It's an interesting point you make. Levi's actually doesn't manufacture in China. They did for a time, and they pulled out.
That's interesting.
They do sell there.
Okay, for some reason I thought that some things I saw from Levi's were made in China, but I guess not. That's good.
It's vanishingly small. If there is some, it's vanishingly small. They've quietly pulled out.
I'm always excited about that. I'm always excited when things are not made in China for the very reasons that they didn't want to manufacture out of China in the first place.
It's a complicated process, supply chains, because there's putting the product together there in factories, which Levi's doesn't do, but a good portion of the world's cotton is actually grown in China. And I can't say with certainty whether or not they're using cotton.
Right.
And a lot of the world's organic cotton is grown. I think a huge percent of the world's organic cotton is grown in the Xinjiang province, which is where the Uyghur slave labor is used.
Yeah, it is a complicated process, but it would be great, even with all the complications, for like the companies that do not just manufacture in China, but cater to China in so many ways, like the NBA, at least just have like a little bit of humility to say, you know what, this is complicated. We understand there are human rights abuses here. That's why, we're not, shouting down people in the U.S. who don't agree with us ideologically, but there's like no humility whatsoever. It's just you're on the wrong side if you don't agree with us, even as
no company, whether they manufacture there or not, to protect themselves from the scrutiny that would come from manufacturing in China. No company wants to disavow the authoritarian government in China because they do not want to sacrifice the potential profits that can be made there simply due to the size of the population and the ever-growing middle and upper class. And so Levi's, we tried to walk a fine line there because we never wanted, if you do, disavow the government's tactics, if you do say anything about the fact that there are Uyghurs in forced labor camps, you will be boycotted in China and the consumers will not buy your product. So companies try to walk a line, which is what we saw with the NBA, right? They want to avail themselves of the billions of dollars. And so no one within the NBA can criticize the Chinese regime, which is, exactly what we saw.
It's all about money at the end of the day. Which, you know what?
Always.
I understand. The company needs to make a profit. I'm not saying that they shouldn't, but maybe they should not talk about politics here then either, if that's going to be their stance in China.
So that was Allie Beth Stuckey and Jennifer Seys. I hope you enjoyed part one. We will hear the rest of the conversation in the next episode. Heavenly Father, we just pray you continue to be with us as we go through this series. And we pray, Lord, that people are being enlightened and hearing and seeing things that they maybe were not aware of. Continue to bless us in Jesus' name. Amen. So part 2 next time. This is Bob Manook declaring blessings on you and yours till we meet again. Amen.